We're on to the fourth and final precon for Duskmourn Endless Punishment, a black and red deck featuring a new version of Valgavoth that is very similar to the winter deck that I presented about 2 weeks ago. But I wanted to go ahead and go over some of the new stuff that's in this deck that isn't in the other deck, as well as some new cards that I shared with the winter deck that are going to be in the upgrade. So let's get into that now. For the front face of this deck, we get a second version of the main bad guy with Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. For 2, a black and a red, it's an Elder Demon with flying and Ward of Pay 2 life. It's a 4/4 to start off with, and it says whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, and draw a card. This is a much more playable version of the Elder Demon compared to the one that's in the main set, and we get an ever-growing threat that, if left unchecked, will be able to get someone to 21 commander damage and knock someone out of the game right away. And I love that the ward cost is even more pain for our opponents to even target it, adding to the full theme of the deck. The other new commander is a card that adds a little bit of a wild card element to the deck with the Lord of Pain. For 3, a black and a red, it's a human assassin with menace, 5/5. Your opponents can't gain life, and whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another target player. The Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. This guy is going to end games with some messed up politics. Deals will be made with someone to cast a huge spell into this to take someone else out, and it's going to get really messy with the life total math when players are trying to decide whether to cast into this thing at the risk of being the target of the trigger. All in all, it's just, I love this card and I want to do a build with it in mind, but for now we're going to stick with Valgavoth at the lead. But one demon we are not sticking with is Carter Doom Scourge. 4 mana for a conditional death trigger isn't something I really like, and the one-shot goading effect really hasn't ever amounted to much whenever I've tried playing the card. So instead, we're going to improve our damage triggers with Artist's Talent. Chapter 3 is what we're after here, to add +2 damage to all of our damage sources on our side of the field, and that can add up really fast with all these 1 damage hits that the deck can do, turning them into basically lightning bolt levels of damage. Now, one of the sources for those 1 damage hits is getting cut from the deck for being a very big non-bow with a good chunk of this deck. Rampaging Ferocidon is a good card when you need to cut off life gain for your opponents, but this deck has a lot of gain and drain mechanics and lifelink tied to its creatures, and this completely stops all of that from working. So instead, let's weaponize that life gain with a new card from the set, Enduring Tenacity. Every gain that you get off of this with this thing on the board is going to damage your opponent without stopping our own life total from going up, and the snake is doubly hard to get rid of because if they destroy it, it's coming back to keep the torment of our opponents. Now on paper, our next cut sounds really good, but in practice it is just kind of so-so. Harsh Mentor got tons of buzz when it was originally released, but the fact of the matter is that most activated abilities are mana abilities in Commander, which means this thing doesn't do anything against an opponent. So unless your playgroup has someone who is dedicated to an equipment deck and you want to make them suffer, this card needs to get out of this deck. So instead, I'm going to put it in another 2-drop in the form of Razorkin Needlehead. This is a more reliable way to get damage and punish our opponents, especially if they are greedy card gobblers. With this thing out, every card they draw is just 1 point closer to their demise. Next up is a card that when I first started playing Commander, I thought it was a freaking awesome card as a commander, but for 7 mana, Caravec the Merciless just doesn't do enough. This is a card that if it were printed today, it would at least have some kind of ward ability to balance out the fact that it does absolutely nothing until your opponents start playing things, but usually the one and only thing they ever cast while this is out is a 2 to 3 mana removal spell. Someone bites that bullet, eats a little bit of damage, and moves on. So instead, we're going to be grievously wounding an opponent with a card that is going to really ruin someone's day as they lose half their life every time one of our little pain effects goes off. Draw a card with a Razorkin Needlehead out, go ahead and lose half your life. Sack something while I have a Mayhem Devil out and get pinged, lose half again. Several sources in this deck are just simple 1 damage hits, but with this on the board, someone is going to be having a lot of pain coming their way, especially if they're little troublemakers causing you all kinds of problems. Just remember, life loss does not trigger this, just damage, but there's more than enough of that with this deck to make it a great silver bullet to deal with life gain players, someone that's pulling ahead, or even as a spite play on someone you just want to mess with. with. Now, if I were running a more demon-centric version of this deck, Rakdos, Lord of Riots would actually be a slam dunk here to help us get some of the more expensive demons out on the board, and I'd likely even slot it into the big main version of Valgavoth here if I were running that type of deck, but we're not. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it out for something that actually comes from one of the other precons for Duskmourn, but it probably should have been in this precon, Giggling Skitter Spike. It is just so damned good, and it completely fits the theme of this deck of just piling on the pain. You swing, you blast them, you block, you blast them, and if they don't have a way to deal with this, it's going to really suck for your opponents if this thing gets to hang around. Our next cut is going to be Tectonic Giant. No fuss here. It's just an okay magic card, but it never really impressed me much unless you're going to be playing alongside some kind of damage doubler or tripler to get the most out of that damage trigger. If your concern is the card exile to go ahead and play with it, I'm going to suggest a new door that can replace a lot of parts that the Giant gives for us in the deck, and that's Unholy Annex / Ritual Chamber. This can get us a nice 6/6 flying demon on the one side, but the main thing here is Unholy Annex on the other side. We get to have a card at the end of the end step, and if we control a demon, we get to do a gain and drain of our opponents for 2, which is most of the damage that you would have done with the Giant, but we also get the card at the same time, and since the deck already has a few demons, including Valgavoth himself, it's pretty easy to get the drain online and avoid the life loss part that does come if you don't have a demon around. And then the last cut for the deck is going to be Thought Vessel. Max hand size for us getting removed, it really isn't enough of a reason for me to care about this rock, and it doesn't make a color of any kind of mana for us, so I'm going to scrap it in favor of a new card, the Roller Crusher Ride. This can just help us sweep up threats, and if we hit the Delirium, we get to double up any of our non-combat damage. Now, just a word of caution with this, using this and anything that adds damage to an effect like the Artist Talent, you don't get to decide the order of how this thing gets stacked up with its additive effect. So for example, the Artist Talent and the Roller Crusher Ride, your opponents get to pick the order those are applied, so they're probably going to double the damage first, so one damage ping goes to 2, and then they'll add it on rather than adding it on and then doubling it to 6. So they'll take 4 instead of 6. So it's just something to bear in mind that if you're going to mess with the math, it's still worth having. It's just not going to be as effective as you might think it'll be. And those are my changes for the Endless Punishment Precon. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. If you had an interest in building the winter deck that I created a couple weeks ago, this is a very good place to start getting the cards for that deck, because a lot of the stuff I recommended there is already coming in this precon, including Kezrek Parasite, which is actually a card that was before that reprint in this thing was going for about $18. So that's like half the cost of the precon almost in one card. So with that said, if you have any other suggestions, please let us know down in those comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.